This story is dedicated to all the couples torn apart by war, to all the futures that never were, and to the enduring power of love in the darkest of times. May we never forget their sacrifice, and may we always remember that behind every statistic of war is a human heart that loved and was loved in return. The field hospital sat 3 miles behind the front lines in Normandy, a collection of canvas tents that smelled of disinfectant, blood, and desperation. Eleanor Hayes had been there for 6 weeks, and in that time, she'd learned to sleep through artillery fire, to eat while surrounded by suffering, and to lock away her tears until the rare moments she found herself alone. She was 24 years old, with dark hair she kept pinned beneath her nurse's cap and green eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. Before the war, she'd been a schoolteacher in Massachusetts, reading poetry to children and tending her mother's garden. Now her hands, once soft from turning pages, were rough and efficient, skilled at changing dressings, administering morphine, and holding the hands of dying boys who called out for their mothers. It was on a humid July morning when Captain James Sullivan was brought in on a stretcher, conscious but bleeding from shrapnel wounds across his left side. Eleanor was assigned to his care, and as she cut away his uniform to assess the damage, their eyes met for the first time. He said through gritted teeth, managing a weak smile despite his pain. "I hope you're as good at this as you look like you are." "I'm better," Eleanor replied, her hands steady as she worked. "Now be quiet and let me save your life, Captain." His wounds, though painful, weren't fatal. Over the next 2 weeks, as Eleanor tended to him daily, they began to talk. James told her about his family's farm in Iowa, about the horses he'd raised since childhood, about his younger sister who wrote him letters full of gossip from home. Eleanor shared stories of her students, of the seaside town where she'd grown up, of the books she'd loved before words like triage and casualty had become her everyday vocabulary. What struck her most about James wasn't his handsome features or his broad shoulders, though she noticed both. It was the gentleness in his eyes, a kindness that war hadn't managed to extinguish. He asked the other patients how they were feeling, shared his cigarette rations with men who had none, and wrote letters for soldiers whose hands shook too badly to hold a pen. On his last night in the hospital, before he was to return to his unit, James found Eleanor during her break, sitting on an overturned crate behind the supply tent, watching the sunset paint the French countryside in shades of amber and rose. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She gestured to the ground beside her, and he sat, their shoulders nearly touching. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then James said, quietly, "I've been in this war for 18 months, Eleanor. I've seen men die in every way you can imagine. I've given orders that sent good men to their deaths. And through all of it, I felt numb. Like I was watching it happen to someone else." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense. "But these past 2 weeks, talking to you, hearing you laugh when I told you about my horse breaking into the cornfield, seeing you care for these men with such tenderness, I've felt alive again. Truly alive. And I'm terrified to lose that." Eleanor's heart pounded. She knew she should maintain professional distance, that attachments in wartime led only to heartbreak. But looking at this man who'd somehow remained gentle in the midst of brutality, she couldn't lie. "I feel it too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me as well." James reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then let's be terrified together." Over the following months, as the Allied forces pushed deeper into France, James's unit remained within a day's distance of Eleanor's hospital. Military regulations forbade relationships between officers and nurses, but love, as it tends to do, paid no attention to regulations. They met whenever they could, stealing moments between duty shifts. James would arrive at the hospital under the pretense of checking on his men, and Eleanor would find reasons to step outside, to walk past the supply depot, to take her breaks when his jeep pulled up. Their courtship unfolded in snatches of conversation, in letters written by flashlight and smuggled through friendly intermediaries. James wrote about his dreams for after the war, about returning to Iowa and teaching Eleanor to ride horses, about building a house near his family's farm where they could watch the cornfields turn gold each autumn. Eleanor wrote back about the school she wanted to open, about teaching children to love learning, about the garden she would plant with roses and lavender. She wrote about mornings waking up beside him, about growing old together, about all the ordinary, beautiful moments that war made seem impossibly precious. In August, they managed to spend an entire evening together when James's unit was given a brief rest period. They met in a small village that had been liberated weeks earlier, in a cafe whose owner, an elderly Frenchwoman named Madame Rousseau, had taken pity on the young lovers. Madame Rousseau served them wine and bread and cheese, then discreetly left them alone in her back room, where evening light streamed through lace curtains and made everything feel, for a moment, like they were just a young couple in love, rather than two people caught in history's grinding gears. "Dance with me," James said, though there was no music. "There's nothing to dance to," Eleanor laughed. "Then I'll hum." And he did, humming an old swing tune as he pulled her close and they swayed together, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Marry me," James whispered into her hair. "Not now, not here, but after. When this is all over. Say you'll marry me, Eleanor." She pulled back to look up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." He kissed her then, and in that kiss was everything they couldn't say, all the hope and fear and desperate love that came from knowing that every moment together might be their last. "I love you," he said. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens, whatever comes, I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," she replied. "You're my future, James Sullivan. You're everything I want." They spent that night talking until dawn, planning the life they would build together, making promises about children and Christmases and anniversaries stretching into the distant, beautiful future. When they finally parted, as the sun rose over the ruined village, neither wanted to acknowledge the possibility that those plans might remain only dreams. September brought rain and the Allied push toward Germany. The fighting intensified, and the hospital tent filled with wounded men faster than Eleanor and her fellow nurses could treat them. 70-hour shifts became normal. Sleep became a luxury measured in stolen minutes between emergencies. James wrote when he could, but his letters grew shorter, more careful. He couldn't tell her where he was or what operations his unit was undertaking, but she could read between the lines, could sense the growing danger in what he didn't say. "My dearest Eleanor," one letter read, "I keep your photograph in my breast pocket, right over my heart. The men tease me about it, but I don't care. When things get difficult, I take it out and look at your face, and I remember what I'm fighting for. Not for abstract ideals or political causes, but for the chance to see you smile again, to hold you again, to build that life we talked about. You are my courage, my love. You are my reason to survive." Eleanor carried that letter with her always, reading it so many times that the paper grew soft and worn at the creases. She wrote back every night, even when exhaustion made her hand shake, even when she'd just lost another patient and tears blurred her vision. "My darling James," she wrote, "I see so much death here. Boys no older than my students, crying for their mothers, for their sweethearts, for home. And each time I lose one, I think of you out there, and my heart stops until your next letter arrives. Come back to me. Whatever it takes, however long this war lasts, promise me you'll come back." In October, James managed to visit the hospital briefly. Eleanor was in surgery when he arrived, working frantically to save a soldier whose leg had been nearly severed by a landmine. James waited for 3 hours, and when she finally emerged, exhausted and covered in blood, he was there. They couldn't embrace, not in front of the other staff, but their eyes met across the crowded tent, and in that moment, everything else fell away. Later, hidden behind the supply trucks in the darkness, James held her while she cried, releasing the grief and fear she'd held bottled for weeks. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired of watching them die, James. I'm so tired of being afraid that you'll be next." "I know," he murmured, stroking her hair. "I know, my love. But we're going to make it through this. Both of us. And when we do, we'll go somewhere quiet and peaceful, and we'll never think about this war again. Promise me," she said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks." James wanted to promise, wanted to give her that peace. But he was a soldier, and he knew better than to make promises he might not be able to keep. "I promise," he said anyway, "that I will do everything in my power to come home to you. That every decision I make, every risk I take, will be made with the thought of you waiting for me. I promise that you are my first thought in the morning and my last thought at night. I promise that I love you more than life itself." It wasn't the promise she'd asked for, but it was the truth, and Eleanor understood. She kissed him, trying to memorize the feel of his lips, the warmth of his body, the sound of his heartbeat. Trying to store up this moment against all the empty moments to come. Winter came early that year, and with it came the German counteroffensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Allies, who had been advancing steadily, suddenly found themselves fighting desperately against a massive enemy assault. James's unit was thrown into the thickest of the fighting, holding a crucial road junction against overwhelming odds. For 2 weeks, Eleanor received no letters, heard no news. The hospital overflowed with casualties from the battle, and she worked in a fog of fear and exhaustion, her hands performing their tasks automatically while her mind screamed for word of James. Then, on December 22, a soldier from James's company was brought in with a gunshot wound to the shoulder. Eleanor recognized him immediately, a young private named Tommy Reeves whom James had mentioned in his letters. "Private Reeves," she said urgently as she treated his wound. "Captain Sullivan, your commanding officer, do you know?" The private's face went pale. He said quietly, "The captain, he's alive. But he's hurt bad. Real bad. We were holding the crossroads, see, and the Germans hit us with everything they had. The captain, he was getting the wounded back to cover when an artillery shell hit close. Shrapnel got him in the chest and abdomen." Eleanor's hands froze. "Where is he?" "They took him to the forward aid station. That was yesterday morning. I don't know if—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Which aid station? Where?" But before Private Reeves could answer, the tent flap burst open and medics rushed in carrying a stretcher. And on that stretcher, unconscious and ashen, was James. Eleanor's training took over, pushing aside her terror. She shouted orders, directing the medics to the surgical tent, already assessing James's injuries with practiced eyes. They were catastrophic. Shrapnel had torn through his torso, causing massive internal bleeding. His pulse was thready, his breathing shallow. The head surgeon, Major Thompson, took one look and pulled Eleanor aside. "Nurse Hayes," he said gently, "you know you can't be the one to work on him. You're too close." "I'm the best surgical nurse you have," Eleanor said flatly. "And he needs the best." Major Thompson studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But you follow my orders exactly. Understood." "Understood." For the next 4 hours, Eleanor worked with a precision born of love and desperation. She assisted Major Thompson as he removed shrapnel, repaired what could be repaired, tried to stem the bleeding that wouldn't stop. But even as her hands moved with professional skill, her heart was breaking. She'd seen too many wounds like this. She knew. When Major Thompson finally stepped back from the table, his face grim, Eleanor knew what he was going to say before he spoke. "We've done all we can," he said quietly. "The damage is too extensive. I'm sorry, Eleanor. He has hours, maybe less." "No," Eleanor whispered. "No, there has to be something else we can do. Another surgery, a transfusion, something." "Eleanor." Major Thompson gripped her shoulders gently. "You know there isn't. I'm so sorry." They moved James to a private corner of the recovery tent, making him as comfortable as possible with morphine for the pain. Eleanor pulled a chair beside his cot and took his hand, and there she sat as the winter afternoon faded into evening. James regained consciousness as darkness fell. His eyes fluttered open, confused at first, then focusing on Eleanor's face above him. "Hey," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "There's my beautiful girl." Eleanor tried to smile, but tears were streaming down her face. "Hey yourself. You scared me." "I'm sorry." He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. "I broke my promise." "I'm so sorry, Eleanor." "Sure," she said, leaning close. "Don't apologize. You're here now. That's what matters." James's eyes searched her face, and she saw the moment he understood. The moment he realized he was dying. His expression crumpled briefly, then smoothed into something like acceptance. "How long?" he asked. "I don't know. Hours, maybe." Eleanor couldn't lie to him, not now. "I'm so sorry, James. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." "You did save me," he said softly. "You saved me from numbness, from forgetting what it meant to be human. You gave me something worth fighting for, worth living for. These months with you, they were worth everything." Eleanor pressed her forehead against his, tears falling onto his face. We were supposed to have a lifetime. We were supposed to get married, to have children, to grow old together. This isn't fair. This isn't how our story was supposed to end. I know. James lifted his hand with effort, touching her cheek. Tell me about it anyway. Tell me about the life we would have had. And so, as the night deepened and snow began to fall outside the tent, Eleanor told him stories. She described their wedding day, the white dress she would have worn, the way he would have looked waiting for her at the altar. She told him about the farmhouse they would have built, about the garden with roses and lavender, about the porch where they would have sat on summer evenings watching the sunset. She told him about their children, 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl, all with his blue eyes and her dark hair. She described their first steps, their first words, the way James would have taught them to ride horses and be kind to animals. She told him about Christmases filled with laughter, about birthday cakes and skinned knees and bedtime stories. She told him about growing old together, about grandchildren, about celebrating their 50th anniversary surrounded by the family they'd built. She painted their entire future in words, making it real with her voice, giving him the gift of the life they would never live. James listened, his eyes on her face, occasionally asking questions, adding details of his own. When he grew too weak to speak, he simply held her hand and listened to her voice, letting it carry him through the pain. As midnight approached, James's breathing grew more labored. Eleanor knew the end was near. She climbed onto the narrow cot beside him, carefully positioning herself so she wouldn't hurt him, and gathered him into her arms. I don't want to go, James whispered. I don't want to leave you. I know, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. I don't want you to go either. But I'll be all right. I promise you, James, I'll be all right. I'll live the life we planned. Maybe not exactly the way we imagined it, but I'll find joy again. I'll honor what we had by living fully, by not letting the war take everything from me. That's my girl, James murmured. Always so strong. Always so brave. I learned that from you. James was quiet for a moment, gathering his strength for what he needed to say. Eleanor, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll love again. Someday, when enough time has passed, promise me you'll let someone else make you happy. I can't bear the thought of you being alone forever. James? Please. Promise me. I want you to have everything we talked about. If I can't give it to you, then let someone else. Let yourself be happy. Eleanor sobbed against his chest, but she nodded. I promise. But you need to know, no one will ever take your place. You're the love of my life, James Sullivan. My first love, my true love. Whatever comes after, you'll always be in my heart. And you'll always be in mine, James whispered. In this life and whatever comes next. I'll be waiting for you, Eleanor. On that porch we dreamed about, watching the sunset. I'll wait for you there. I'll find you, Eleanor promised. When my time comes, I'll find you. And we'll have eternity to make up for the time we lost. James smiled, and in that smile was all the love and tenderness that had defined their brief time together. I love you, Eleanor Hayes. I love you beyond words, beyond death, beyond anything this world can throw at us. I love you too, Eleanor whispered. I love you, James. I love you. His eyes drifted closed, then open again, fighting to stay with her for just a few moments more. His hand tightened around hers with surprising strength. Eleanor, he said, his voice barely audible now. Do me a favor? Of course. Anything. Tell them, tell everyone, that it was worth it. All of it. The pain, the sacrifice, the dying, it was worth it for the chance to love you. I will, Eleanor promised. I'll tell them. James's breathing slowed, becoming peaceful. Eleanor held him close, whispering words of love, describing one more time the sunset they would have watched together, the life they would have lived. She told him it was okay to let go, that she would be strong, that she would carry their love with her always. At 12:47 a.m. on December 23, 1944, Captain James Sullivan took his last breath in the arms of the woman he loved. Eleanor held him long after he was gone, rocking him gently, memorizing the feel of him, saying goodbye to the future they would never have. When Major Thompson finally came to check on them and found her there, he didn't rush her. He simply pulled a blanket over both of them and left her to her grief. Eleanor returned to Massachusetts after the war ended. She never did open that school she dreamed about, but she did return to teaching, and for 35 years, she educated children with a passion and tenderness that everyone remarked upon. She spoke often to her students about kindness, about courage, about the importance of cherishing the people you love because tomorrow is never guaranteed. She never married. There were men who courted her over the years, good men who could have made her happy, but Eleanor politely declined them all. She had made a promise to James that she would live fully, and she did. She traveled, she gardened, she had close friends and was beloved by her students and their families. She lived a rich, full life. But her heart belonged to a soldier she'd loved for one brief, shining moment during the worst war the world had ever seen. Eleanor kept all of James's letters, tied with a blue ribbon and stored in a cedar box. Once a year, on December 23rd, she would take them out and read them, allowing herself that one day to fully feel the loss and remember the love. The rest of the year, she carried him quietly in her heart, a private treasure that no one could take from her. She lived to be 83 years old. In her final days, surrounded by former students who had become like family, she spoke often of James. She told them about his kindness, his courage, his dreams for a peaceful future. She told them about the love they'd shared, and how it had sustained her through all the years that followed. On the morning she died, Eleanor was found peaceful in her sleep, a smile on her face. Clutched in her hand was a faded photograph of a young soldier in uniform, his blue eyes bright with hope and love. Those who knew her liked to imagine that wherever Eleanor went, James was waiting. That somewhere beyond this world, they finally got that porch, that sunset, that lifetime they'd been promised. That their story, interrupted by war and tragedy, found its happy ending at last. Because some loves, the truest loves, are too strong even for death to defeat. This story is dedicated to all the couples torn apart by war, to all the futures that never were, and to the enduring power of love in the darkest of times. May we never forget their sacrifice, and may we always remember that behind every statistic of war is a human heart that loved and was loved in return.